Hello, and welcome to this video overview, in which I, Don Lucas, discuss some of the most important concepts from Chapter 3, Paragraphing, in the textbook I wrote, College Composition and Reading, Information and Strategies. We'll discuss basic information and go over 4 methods briefly: pie paragraphing, 5-step paragraphing, sentence sequencing, and the mini-essay approach. First, we'll review some paragraph basics. The first thing that I want to mention about paragraphs is what they actually are. A paragraph is a sentence or group of sentences that form a coherent and connected unit. Notice that the key feature is connectivity, not number of sentences. While assigning a minimum number of sentences is one way to get students to write more, it's not actually an aspect of the definition of a paragraph. As this definition implied, a paragraph can consist of a single sentence. This is often the case with newspaper articles. While 3 to 5 sentences is a good guideline, it's by no means a rule set in stone. So then, what elements should a well-written paragraph in an essay have? First, it should have a clear topic sentence that indicates what argument the paragraph will be supporting. Just like the thesis statement, a good topic sentence will include both the topic and the argument or perspective being put forth. Of course, that idea should be adequately developed, both with examples, quotes, and other information, as well as explanation and analysis. You'll see some suggestions for development listed in your textbook chapter in the section entitled Elements of a Paragraph on page 57. Finally, it should have coherence, which means that everything in the paragraph connects together. There isn't anything that doesn't belong, and the pieces flow smoothly with appropriate verbal and logical transitions. Basically, it all boils down to the most important rule, that there should be only one idea, focus, or reason given per paragraph. Now that we've reviewed the basics of what a paragraph is, let's look at several methods for producing them, particularly for academic essays. The first method we'll be looking at is my personal favorite, and one that will be referred back to often in this course: pie paragraphing. I highly recommend this method as an easy way to make sure you're writing fully developed paragraphs with good flow and structure. PI is an acronym, with each letter standing for one part of a complete paragraph. The first letter is P, which stands for the point. This is the topic sentence. What's the point or argument that the paragraph is trying to prove? This question should be answered in the first sentence. For example, a topic sentence might be, "One benefit of taking a writing course at the college will be to help your communication skills." The next part of the paragraph is the I for information. To support the topic sentence, you might have information like, "For example, my coworker took the course and his emails and notes were much more clear and easy to understand afterwards." This is where you give facts, examples, statistics, or other evidence to support your thesis. The final element is the E for explanation. As I've said before, now that you're in college, it isn't enough to merely present information. You must analyze it and explain it. Most often, you'll be connecting the information back to your thesis or topic sentence. For example, my explanation sentence for the paragraph about communication might be, "If it can help my coworker, it can help anyone, and with how important communication is in life, everyone should take a basic writing class." There are many suggestions and questions listed in the textbook to help you make sure that you have enough analysis or explanation, the E in a pie paragraph. Also, note that you can have more than one piece of information or explanation in the paragraph. The textbook mentions the PIE-IE pattern, which is fairly common. However, remember that you can only have one point per paragraph. Here's another example of pie paragraphing. The point is, one reason to watch less television is the effect it has on your energy levels. This connects so clearly to the thesis that we can actually tell the thesis is about how we should watch less TV just from reading the topic sentence, and we know the supporting argument that's going to be discussed. That's followed by information. Researcher Robert Kuby noticed that in his study, quote, "Participants commonly reflect that the television has somehow absorbed or sucked out their energy, leaving them depleted," end quote, as well as making it more difficult to concentrate. Kuby also reported that the study of brainwaves showed that television affected people by making them feel, quote, "tired and worn out," end quote. Anyone who has sat down for just a few minutes and ended up watching hours of television has similarly experienced the energy-sucking power of television. Here we have several pieces of information supporting the point, although one is all that's required. However, in this case, more information made the argument more compelling. Finally, the paragraph ends with an explanation that ties the information back to the topic sentence and ultimately to the thesis. Clearly, the problem with television isn't just the content. No matter what you watch, you'll feel drained. Since it's common knowledge that being active makes you happier and healthier, people should avoid the energy drain we call television. Again, pie paragraph is an excellent, handy, and effective strategy for paragraph structure that I highly advise you to take advantage of. However, for now, we'll look at other methods for composing and evaluating paragraphs. Now, as I mentioned, I consider pie paragraphing to be the easiest and most effective method, and it's something I'll be referring back to throughout the semester. However, my goal is to give you as many different tools and strategies to have at your disposal as possible, particularly since different methods can be more effective for different people. Therefore, I'll be discussing some other methods of paragraphing as well, although you'll notice some similarities between the methods, since all are aimed at the same final product, a well-structured and adequately developed paragraph. The next paragraphing method that we'll be discussing is called 5-step paragraphing, and unsurprisingly, it consists of 5 steps that you follow. The first step, anytime you set out to write a paragraph, will always be the same: to figure out your main idea or argument, and then write a topic sentence that lets your reader know what the point of the paragraph is going to be and how it relates to your thesis. Remember, just like a thesis statement, a topic sentence should include both the subject and the argument being made about it, and should connect directly and explicitly to the thesis. For instance, in the textbook, the example topic sentence given is, quote, "Learning how to turn in homework assignments on time is one of the invaluable skills that college students can take with them into the working world," end quote. You know that the topic is turning in homework, and that the point is that it's a valuable skill you take with you when you graduate and get a job. In addition, it's clear how this supports the thesis. The thesis has to be something like, college students learn many invaluable skills that they can also use in the working world. The next portion of a 5-step paragraph is the explanation of the topic sentence. This is where you explain a little more about what you mean and use logic to support it. Following this, you'll have your example, which should directly illustrate or support the topic sentence. You might have one example or several depending on the length of the examples. This is where your primary support for your topic sentence goes. You'll then follow that example with explanation or analysis to make clear to your reader why that particular example was chosen and what they were supposed to get out of it. You should always make clear the relationship between the information that you give and the point that you're trying to prove. If needed, you can also repeat the example and explanation steps 3 and 4, until you have the paragraph sufficiently developed to support your topic sentence. The harder time readers have with your point, the more evidence you want supporting it. Finally, you'll wrap the paragraph up with a conclusion or transition to the next paragraph. This is where you wrap it all up and connect back to the central idea, which is your logical connection to the next paragraph, since both paragraphs support that central idea. Tie up the paragraph and remind your reader of the relevance or importance of your information to your point. There's an example in your book, but to make things crystal clear, let's look at a different example of a 5-step paragraph. Let's take a look at what a 5-step paragraph might look like. For the topic sentence, you might again write something like, "One reason to watch less television is the effect it has on your energy levels." Again, it's clear what the thesis is, an argument that people should watch less TV, as well as the point of the paragraph itself. You shouldn't watch it because TV has a negative effect on your energy. For the explanation of your topic sentence, you'd give the logic behind what you're saying. Perhaps something like, "Nearly everyone wishes that they had more energy, whether to play with their kids, to get tasks accomplished, or just to go out and have fun with friends. But television watching can rob us of that energy." Then you follow that with your example. Researcher Robert Kuby studied brainwaves and concluded that television affected people by making them feel, quote, "tired and worn out. Television has somehow absorbed or sucked out their energy, leaving them depleted," end quote. Of course, the raw information itself is not enough. For an expository essay, you need to be explaining or analyzing it as well. In this case, saying something like, while many people think of television as a way to relax and restore themselves, Kubi's study clearly shows that contrary to their expectations, watching television adds to fatigue by draining away the little energy left. Then you finish up with your conclusion or transition to the next paragraph. Clearly, television viewing is not just a waste of time, but a waste of energy too. Watching less television will benefit you in a number of ways, not the least of which is re-energizing your life. Notice how this begins with a conclusion-type transition and links the information back to the point and overall thesis. Another type of paragraph we're going to look at is sentence sequencing. However, the first thing I want to say about sentence sequencing is that it's not like the other methods we've looked at. It's not really meant to be used in a step-by-step manner to write a paragraph from scratch. On the other hand, it is extremely useful as a way of training yourself to see connections between paragraphs. As I already mentioned, in a paragraph, all the sentences should be connected to each other or the topic sentence. If a sentence doesn't connect, then it doesn't belong. And many students are familiar with the idea of flow and being told that their writing is choppy or that it needs to flow more smoothly, but often little or no guidance is provided on how to fix it. Sentence sequencing is a method helping you to be able to see how, and whether, your sentences connect, and thus is really more useful for revision than for producing paragraphs in the first place. There are basically two ways that sentences can connect to each other. Either they're equal to or coordinate with each other, such as two examples that both support the topic sentence, or else one is subordinate to the other and is explaining it or offering additional details to support it. Once you learn to easily recognize the relationships between sentences and determine whether they're subordinate, coordinate, or unrelated, you'll be able to use that skill to improve your paragraph's focus and flow. The types of connections within a paragraph determines which of the three main types of paragraph it is: coordinate, subordinate, or mixed. Let's take a look at how you evaluate a paragraph using sentence sequencing before you look at some examples and get a chance to practice. The process for performing sentence sequencing is actually fairly simple. Basically, you assign a number to each sentence that indicates how it relates to a previous sentence. Since the first sentence in a paragraph should be a topic sentence and should start a new train of thought, we begin our numbering with the topic sentence and label it as being level 1. Then you look at each following sentence to decide how it relates. If it's subordinate and is giving further details or explanation about the previous sentence, you assign it one number higher. So if the second sentence explains the topic sentence or gives an example to support it, you would assign it a 2, since the topic sentence is a 1. If the sentence is coordinate and is at the same level as the previous sentence, you give it the same number. For example, if your third sentence is another example at the same level as the previous one, you would assign it a number 2 as well. This can be a little hard to understand in the abstract, so let's look at some paragraph types and practice using sentence sequencing on them. The first type of paragraph that we're going to look at is a coordinate sequence, where all the sentences except the topic sentence are coordinate with each other. This means that while the topic sentence is a level 1, every other sentence in the paragraph will be level 2. Coordinate sequences also have a number of common characteristics, which you'll get to see illustrated on the next slide. Coordinate sequences are often presented as a list of parallel examples. They often start the same or in a similar way, and the sentences themselves are interchangeable. Let's take a look at how that works with this example. In order to illustrate how this works, let's read through a sample paragraph, label it using sentence sequencing, and then review the common characteristics. The paragraph reads, "The fact is, there are men who do care about their children. They diaper them, feed them, walk with them in the middle of the night, worry about their physical development and emotional growth. They side with them against unreasonable teachers and struggle through homework with them when it increases at an astronomical rate. They put band-aids on their cuts and suffer with them the emotional bruises that will take no bandaging. They hug their children when they cry and their own eyes get wet at the sight of their kids growing into strength and independence. Okay, now that we've read through it, let's go through how to label it. You can see that I've put the letters A through E next to each sentence to help us label them clearly. So then, as I said to start with, the first sentence will always be level 1. Now, sentence A, the topic sentence, is about men caring about their kids. Sentence B gives an example of how they care about them. They take care of them as babies and worry about them. Therefore, since it's giving additional information, explanation, or support to the level 1 sentence, it will be a level 2 sentence. Next, sentence C says that fathers side with their kids and help them with homework. And that's another example of ways that they care. It doesn't have anything to do with diapers or emotional support, but it does give support for the overall idea of dads caring. Therefore, it will also be a level 2 sentence. Sentence D, about putting band-aids on and helping with emotions, is another separate example of how dads care, connected to sentence A, but not the others. It's another example, and therefore it too will be a level 2 sentence. Finally, sentence E is another listed way dads care, another equal example that will also be a level 2 sentence. So then, you can see the pattern that I mentioned on the last slide, where a coordinate paragraph has a level 1 topic sentence, and the rest are level 2. This also illustrates several examples of the common traits. You can see that this is basically a list of equal or parallel illustrations of ways that dads care about their kids. They all start in a similar way. They do this, they do that, they do the other thing. Finally, the sentences are basically interchangeable. You could talk about hugging first and homework next, and the paragraph would still make sense. This will be directly contrary to the next type of paragraph that we're going to look at, subordinate sequences. The next type of paragraph that we're going to look at is a subordinate sequence, where each sentence in the paragraph is subordinate to or dependent on the one before it. Each elaborates on or gives detail about the previous one. This means that when you label this type of paragraph, each sentence is one number higher than the previous one. The topic sentence is 1, the next level is 2, the next level is 3, and so on. Like coordinate sequences, subordinate sequences also have some common characteristics. For instance, since each sentence is subordinate to the one before it, that means that each sentence answers a question or adds detail or elaboration to the previous one. In addition, unlike with coordinate sequences, the order is fixed. If you mix the sentences up, the paragraph no longer makes sense. Usually, this type of paragraph will either be a chronologically ordered retelling or a deep examination of something specific from several angles. Let's take a look at how this works with an example. Again, we'll read through a sample paragraph, label it using sentence sequencing, and then review the common characteristics. In this case, the paragraph reads as follows. One reason I like writing is because it helps me let out my emotions. I could take a piece of paper and write out all of my frustrations and anger. Once I've done that, it's like a little of the feelings themselves ended up on the paper. Being able to discharge part of my feelings onto the paper in that way makes me better able to deal with what's left. Now, as we said before, the first sentence is always going to be level 1. The topic sentence here is about writing to release emotions. The following sentence explains what that means or how it works. It's an explanation of the first one, and thus will be a level 2 sentence. So the topic sentence says, I like writing because I can let my emotions out. How? By writing all of the anger out onto the paper. Sentence B answers a question about sentence A. Then sentence C continues, I can let the emotions out by writing out my anger. How does that help? Once I've written it down, it's like some of the feelings stay on paper. Again, we have a sentence that's answering a question about the previous one, giving more information or elaboration. Therefore, since it's subordinate to a level 2 sentence, sentence C is a level 3 sentence. The final sentence continues to explain. I leave some emotion on the paper. Why is that useful? Leaving some on the paper means I can better deal with what's left. Again, this is an explanation or support for the previous sentence. It's subordinate to sentence C, which is level 3, and therefore sentence D will be level 4. Looking at this, you can see how each sentence gives information or elaborates on or explains the previous sentence. Each one answers a question about the last one. In addition, the order is fixed. You can't move the sentences around and still have the paragraph flow and make sense. Since each sentence explains the one before it, if the explanation came before what's being explained, it would just confuse your readers. So then, we've seen that paragraphs have all coordinate connections, and we've seen paragraphs that have all subordinate connections. We have one last type to look at before we tie it all together. The final type of paragraph is one that combines both coordinate and subordinate connections within the same paragraph, called a mixed sequence. It tends to have 2 or 3 main supports for the topic sentence, much like a coordinate sequence, but then each one of those has 1 or more sentences giving details. In a way, it's literally coordinate and subordinate sequences mixed together. While some sentences give additional details to support or elaborate on previous sentences, others provide lists of parallel examples. Usually each of these is expanded on in some way. Let's take a look at how and why that might happen. Let's begin by diagramming a short, simple paragraph with only 4 sentences. The paragraph reads, "Good students develop effective study habits. They take good notes while they read and in class. Good students ask questions during class and email or come to office hours with any other questions they have. Finally, good students start early on essay assignments so they can use writing as a process." Obviously, as usual, the first sentence will be level 1 since it's establishing the topic for the paragraph. It argues that good students have effective study habits. Sentence B is an example of the types of effective study habits that these good students have, taking notes. Therefore, it's supporting or subordinate to a level 1 sentence, so it's going to be a level 2 sentence. It answers a question about the previous sentence. Good students have effective study habits. Like what? Like taking notes. Sentence C is another separate example of the types of effective study habits good students have. Asking questions is separate from taking notes, but both are supporting the topic sentence. Therefore, since sentence C is subordinate to a level 1 sentence, it would be level 2 as well. Finally, the last sentence gives one final example of the types of effective habits that good students have. They start early and use the writing process. That doesn't have anything to do with asking questions or taking notes. It only has to do with sentence A, the topic sentence. Therefore, this sentence is also a level 2 sentence. Therefore, we can easily determine that this is a coordinate sequence, a list of parallel illustrations. While it's pretty clear, it's also rather dry and kind of boring. Let's see what happens if we turn this coordinate paragraph into a mixed paragraph by adding additional details or elaboration for each of our 3 examples. Again, we'll read through a sample paragraph, label it using sentence sequencing, and then discuss. This expanded version of the paragraph reads, "Good students develop effective study habits. They take good notes while they read and in class. Having a specific format for taking notes makes their notations clear and readable. These students date their note pages, number them, and leave room for definitions or questions. Furthermore, they review their notes after each class while the material is fresh in their minds. Good students ask questions during class and email or come to office hours with any other questions they have. Asking questions gives them a chance to make sure they fully understand the material. Finally, good students start early on essay assignments and use writing as a process. They budget time to analyze the assignment, develop ideas, and plan their essays." Now, right away we can see there's a lot more to this version. However, sentences A and B are still the same, the topic sentence about effective study habits and the example of taking notes. Therefore, their numbers are the same as well. Sentence A is level 1, as the first sentence always is, and sentence B is level 2. However, sentence C is a new one. Instead of giving an example of a different effective study method, it explains or gives an example for sentence B about notes. Students take notes. What's helpful about them? Having a clear format makes them easier to use. So, since it elaborates on or answers a question about a level 2 sentence, that means it's a level 3 sentence. Sentence D continues to talk about notes, giving even more detail. Good students have effective study habits. Like what? Like note-taking. What's helpful about the notes? Having a clear format makes them easier to use. What makes them clear? Having dates, page numbers, and room for extra writing. So far, each sentence has answered a question or given more information about the previous one, meaning that so far this has been a subordinate sequence. Sentence D is subordinate to sentence C, which is level 3, so that means sentence D will be level 4. Sentence E continues to follow this pattern, explaining more about the notes and how and why they're useful, making it a level 5 sentence. However, unlike in a straight subordinate sequence, this pattern does not continue. Sentence F gives a completely different type of study habit, asking questions. This has nothing to do with note-taking. It's completely separate. It has nothing to do with sentences B through F. It's directly subordinate to sentence A since it's an example supporting sentence A. Since it's subordinate to a level 1 sentence, that means that sentence F is a level 2 sentence. On the other hand, sentence G is still talking about asking questions. It's explaining why asking questions is an advantage. Since sentence G is subordinate to a level 2 sentence, that means it's level 3. Sentence H then changes the topic again, giving another separate study habit. Starting early doesn't have to do with taking notes or asking questions, only with effective study habits. Therefore, since it's subordinate directly to our level 1 topic sentence, sentence H is also a level 2 sentence, just like B and F. Finally, the last sentence gives more information and elaboration about why starting early is such an advantage. It's subordinate to our level 2 sentence H, so that means that sentence I is level 3. Whew! So, hopefully that gave you a better idea about how to number sentences. But I also wanted to point out some important aspects about mixed sequences. First, in this mixed version, we have 3 examples of effective study habits, each of which is explained or supported by at least 1 or 2 sentences. This shows you can always expand what you're saying by writing more coordinate sentences or giving more details about them, although you have to be selective in what you choose to discuss and stay focused on your thesis. Basically, the mixed structure is playing 2 dimensions at once, coordinate and subordinate, and thus has a more complex structure. This allows the mixed sequence to be both more entertaining and interesting, as well as more convincing than the rather boring coordinate version. In the first example, we had a rather dry list, but filling it out produced a paragraph that was not only more interesting, but more persuasive as well. I'm a lot more likely to take up the habits mentioned after reading the second version than I would be after reading the first. Overall, a mixed paragraph tends to be the best kind when done correctly. It has more than one reason or example and some support or detail for each. However, that isn't to say that the other types are not useful. Before we move on to our final paragraphing method, let's take a moment to look at the value of each and how you can use these tools in your own writing. As I said, although mixed tends to be the most common and useful, each of the sentence sequence types has its uses. Coordinate is good for giving an overview or lots of reasons in a limited space. Subordinate is useful for going in depth, and mixed is useful for giving some details about a few reasons, often the most useful type. So you might be wondering, how exactly can I use this new tool? Well, the most important use for sentence sequencing is as a perceptual tool. It helps you see the flow, or lack of flow. This is a tool for looking closely at paragraphs and evaluating how and whether the sentences connect. It can help you understand that in a well-written paragraph, the relationships between individual sentences are clear. Sentences should always connect, which is what this tool is designed to show you. The system is merely a technique to allow you to look more closely at paragraphs with a more explicit idea of what you're looking for. Therefore, sentence sequencing tends to be the most useful in revision. It gives you a specific method for evaluating sentence connections, and if you're having a hard time assigning a number, perhaps the sentence doesn't fit. However, this is not the only way it can be used. It's possible to use sentence sequencing as a production method, although it's of limited use in writing. It can be helpful for making sure that you go into some detail and have more than just one support. Finally, the last approach I'll just mention briefly. Like sentence sequencing, this is more of a conceptual approach. It's more of a tool for thinking about and understanding paragraphs rather than a step-by-step method to writing one, like PI or 5-step paragraphing. Basically, you think of each paragraph as being a mini essay. The topic sentence is the introduction, where you include the topic and the point being made about it. The middle is the body, where the specifics are given and discussed to support the point. And the end is the conclusion, wrapping things up and connecting back to the ideas in the beginning or introduction part of the paragraph. Thank you for watching the video lesson on paragraphing. I hope that this overview was helpful and illuminating. Please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions you may have about the material. I'm always here to help.